Hello friends! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint a jar of stars. I'm going to break the process down step by step so you can achieve this no matter your skill level. Let's dive in. I will be drawing on the iPad using the Procreate app version 5.4, and I have my canvas set to 3000 pixels square at 300 dpi. If you don't have enough storage on your iPad for a file this large, you can drop the size down to 1500 pixels square, but keep the DPI at 300. If you'd like to use the same colors I'll be using, I've shared the palette, which you can import directly into Procreate. Or if you're using a different app, you can pull the hex codes from the color card I created for you. I've also created a template with the basic shapes, which you can use as a guide to make the process as easy as possible. There's a link in the description for these free downloads, but if you're one of my email subscribers, be sure to check your inbox because I've already sent you the template and color palette. Before we start drawing, I'd love if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and watch till the very end because it really helps the channel. Since we're going to be using painting brushes for this piece, I'm also going to use a textured paper background. I will leave a link in the description for where I found a great collection of free paper textures. The one I'm using is the Cold Press Arctic paper. I already have the paper image downloaded and saved to my camera roll, so I'm going to go to the Actions menu, make sure to tap Add, tap Insert a Photo, find the paper image and tap to Import. Now the paper image is a rectangle and we're working on a square canvas. So you might just have to increase the size of the image so that it better fits the canvas. When you're done, tap the transform tool to exit that mode. Now in order for the paper texture effect to work, we need to go to that layer, tap on the N, and change the blending mode to multiply. Also keep in mind that this layer needs to remain at the top of the layer stack. So everything we draw or paint will need to be on layers below the paper texture layer. The next thing we need to import is the template. Go back to the Actions menu, make sure you've tapped Add, Insert a Photo, and if you've already downloaded and saved the template, find it in your camera roll, then tap to import. Now we want to make sure that that template is below the paper texture, and we're going to tap on the N and reduce the opacity a bit. Before we start painting, let's sketch a few more details to make this composition just a little more interesting. We have 3 circles here on the template, which you can use as a framework for anything. You can make them planets or maybe constellations. I'm going to turn them into flowers. So let's create a new layer and make sure to drag it below the template. Choose your favorite sketching pencil. I'm going to use Huntsman. For the largest flower, we can start with 3 intersecting lines and then use those as a loose guide for where to place the petals. Of course, you can stylize your flowers however you'd like. You can make it look more like a daisy or a rose, whatever works for you. Also, it's okay if your flower falls outside the jar shape slightly. We'll make adjustments when we start painting. Okay, I'm going to draw the next flower on a new layer just so I have the flexibility to move things around if I need to. So I'm going to create a new layer. I think I'll go with a 4-petal flower this time. And one more layer for the 3rd flower. Let's see, I'll make this one smaller and change up the petal shape. And do more of an almond shape for these petals. I think I'm going to adjust the sizes and positions slightly. So I'm going to make this first flower a bit larger. I want it to sit a little lower in the jar. And then I can move the second flower around, maybe rotate it. Because I want the flowers to overlap slightly. I think that works a little better there. And then the 3rd flower, let's see. think I can have that petal kind of tuck in right there into that open space. And then it'll overlap both flowers. Okay, I think that works. I'm happy with the placement, so I'm gonna go ahead and erase the overlapping areas. So the largest flower will be in the background. So I'm gonna go to that layer and erase the parts of the petals that will be hidden by the second flower. And this tiny flower will be in the foreground, so I'll go to the second flower and erase the bit of this petal that will sit behind that flower. All right, once you feel good about the placement, you can pinch those 3 flower layers together to merge them. Now let's add a few wildflower stems to fill the rest of the jar. So let's start with this open space on the left side. We're gonna draw 2 wavy lines. And you can vary the height. And we're going to make these look kind of like lavender stalks. So I'm just going to add a few curved strokes to represent the tiny flowers. And these won't go all the way down the full length of the stalk. We'll stop maybe about 2/3 of the way down. Then towards the bottom, we can add a few shorter lines to kind of look like blades of grass. Let's do the same with these 2 empty sections as well. Just keep in mind that we still want to leave a little breathing room and blank space because we're going to add more stars eventually. All right, the sketch is mostly done, but let's go ahead and add those additional stars. First, let's turn the opacity back up on the template so that we can see where the current stars are. Okay, so there are 2 positioned in front of the flowers, and this one will partially cover this flower. So let's add a few kind of mid-sized stars in some of these empty spaces. For now, we can just mark the positions with simple crossed lines, and then we can paint the more defined star shapes later. First, we're going to add a nice paint texture to the background. So let's turn off the sketch and template layers for now, create a new layer, and drag it to the bottom of the layer stack. Open up the Procreate library, go to the Paints set, and let's choose Abalone. Then let's choose the deep blue from the palette. I've got the brush set all the way up to 100%, and we're going to start at the bottom of the canvas. And we're going to use really loose strokes to fill about 1/3 of the canvas with this color. We're not going for smooth and precise here. Feel free to change direction, go back and forth. The goal is to see lots of texture. For the middle section, let's switch to the dark blue and do the same. Just go about 1/3 of the way up and add that really nice texture. And then at the top, we're going to use the medium blue. Continue to add a couple more layers of paint until you're happy with how it looks. Just be sure to use a light, loose grip so the brush texture really shows through. Okay, now that we've got the background looking the way we want it, it's time to paint the jar. But when we turn the template layer back on, even with the opacity at 100%, you can see that it's pretty difficult to see the template since it's black on top of a really dark background. So we're just going to turn off our background color for now. Let's drop the opacity down on the template layer pretty low. I've got it at about 15%. Then we're going to create a new layer, and let's drag that new layer above the template. So it's going to sit right above the template, but remember, everything is going to be below the paper texture. We're going to use the symmetry tool to make drawing this jar a whole lot easier. So let's go to the Actions menu, tap Canvas, and turn on the drawing guides. Tap Edit Drawing Guide, then switch to Symmetry mode. Then tap the blue check mark to exit. As long as you haven't moved the template image around, the symmetry guide should align perfectly with the center of the template. Now when you go back to that new layer, you'll see Assisted appears on that layer, confirming that we're using the Drawing Assist feature in symmetry mode. If you've never used the symmetry feature before, you can learn all about it in this video. Okay, the brush we're going to be using is in the Procreate library. Go to the gouache set, and we're going to be painting with chocolate. Then let's switch the color to light blue. I'm going to set the brush to about 4%. And with the symmetry feature on, we can just trace one side of the jar shape and it will be mirrored on the other side. Keep in mind that your painted lines don't need to be super clean and perfect. I actually think it's a bit more charming if the lines are a little wonky. It just adds to the hand-drawn quality. Also, it can be really challenging to paint long, continuous, curved lines, so feel free to break it up into smaller sections and just take your time and work your way all around the shape until you're finished. When you're done painting your jar, go back to the Actions menu, make sure you're in the Canvas section, and you can turn off your drawing guide. While we've got the template turned on, let's go ahead and paint the stars next. First, we're going to go to that template layer and turn the opacity all the way back up. And we need the background color on for now. So turn that background layer back on. And as we saw earlier, it's really difficult to see the template with this dark background. So just for now, we're going to turn the opacity down on the background just enough so that we can clearly see the template. Now create a new layer and drag it up so that it's right below the jar layer. Choose the color Frost from the palette and make your brush size even smaller. I'm going to set mine to about 2%. Now go ahead and paint all those stars. For the really small stars, it's easier to paint the vertical and horizontal lines first, then fill in the curved sections. We can also draw these thin lines on this layer. Again, your lines don't have to be perfect, and if you cross over the jar outline, you can just switch to the eraser tool and erase the excess. Okay, before we forget, let's go ahead and turn the opacity back up on that background layer. And we should have 5 painted stars inside the jar and 6 little ones on the outside. Now we're done with the template layer, so let's go ahead and turn that off and turn back on the sketch layer. Again, we're going to have a hard time seeing the sketch against this very dark background, so we're actually going to change the color of the sketch. So tap on the sketch layer, then turn on Alpha Lock. Select the light blue from the palette, go back to the sketch layer and tap Fill Layer. Don't forget to turn Alpha Lock back off. Now that's much easier to see. And if you want to, you can even reduce the opacity just ever so slightly. Then we're going to drag the sketch layer up so it's right below the paper texture layer. That way it's always going to be visible when we start painting. Now tap on the template layer, then create a new layer. This new layer should show up right below the layer where you painted the stars. Choose the bright green and go ahead and paint the petals of the small flower in the foreground. To add the details in the center, it might be easier to turn off the sketch temporarily so that you can better see what you're doing. Go ahead and choose a color for the center. I'm going to use Frost. And I'm painting directly on the same layer as the petals, but you can do this on a separate layer if you prefer. And I'm going to switch to the leaf green. I'm going to take advantage of the pressure sensitivity and the taper of this brush. I'm just going to kind of flick my wrist to create these tapered lines in the center of each petal. Now create a new layer and drag it below the flower 1 layer. Turn the sketch back on and choose the dark green from the palette. Now go ahead and paint the petals on the second flower. Again, I'm going to paint the outline while I have the sketch visible. And then I'm going to turn off the sketch so that I can better see my paint strokes. Now this brush can get a little transparent, and I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to make the color look super flat. I think it's fine for some of those stroke marks to be visible. Again, it just helps to add to the hand-painted feel. Now, even though this petal is partially hidden by the small flower, I still kind of like to see what's going on under there. So I'm going to turn off the small flower for a second, and I can clean up any areas on that petal that need to be cleaned up. All right, now for the details in the center of this flower. I'm going to change the color to aqua, and then I'm going to add kind of a cluster of short strokes to create the center of this flower. Now I'm going to drop the brush size down to about 2% and then add a few really thin line details to each petal. For this, you don't want to grip your pencil too tight. Just keep a really loose grip and use your whole arm to draw the lines. Now we can switch to the eraser tool and make sure it's also set to the chocolate brush. And then we can just erase the parts of the petals that fall outside of the jar outline. All right, turn the sketch back on, and we're going to paint the third flower. So create a new layer and make sure to drag it below the layer with flower number 2. Choose the blue-green from the palette and go ahead and paint those petals. Again, I'm going to turn that sketch off while I fill those petals so that I can see my stroke marks clearly. And I'm also going to turn off the other 2 flower layers so that I can get any areas that I missed that are sitting behind those 2 flowers. Now I can switch to the eraser tool and just remove the parts of the petals that are falling outside the jar shape. All right, let's switch to the mint color, and we're going to add a few lighter lines towards the center of each petal. So we're just kind of starting maybe halfway down the petal and drawing the lines towards the center. Now let's switch to the smudge tool and make sure that that's set to the Loyalty brush, which is also in the gouache set of the Procreate library. We're going to use the smudge tool to blend and soften those strokes. So you can just kind of push the color upward a bit, and we're just blurring out those really defined lines. For the center of this flower, let's use the dark green. And this time we can paint a solid shape in the center, kind of a circle with wavy edges. And just fill that with color. Then choose the deep blue and just add a few short strokes here and there just to make that a little bit more interesting. All right, looking good so far. Let's turn the sketch back on. I'm going to turn up the opacity just a tiny bit. And now let's tackle these wildflower stalks. So create a new layer and drag it below the layer with flower number 3. Let's go back to the dark green. And first we're going to paint the long stalks and the short blades of grass. This chocolate brush has a taper to it, so it's really nice for drawing flowy lines with lots of movement like this. It's also pressure sensitive, so you can play around with how much pressure you use to add some variation to the widths of the lines. We're going to add the purple flowers next, but we're going to do a little experimenting with the brush, so let's do this on a separate layer. Create a new layer and make sure that it's above the layer with the stalks and grass. Choose the lavender from the palette. And we're not going to paint individual petals, we're just going to suggest the petals with a few really loose brush marks. This brush can do some fun and interesting things depending on how you use it. When it's set to a medium size, if you kind of tap and hold on the screen, it creates kind of a stamped look. If you kind of flick your pencil, it'll give you a tapered, kind of almost teardrop mark. If you use really light pressure, you can get somewhat transparent marks, or you can press down more firmly for a more solid look. So just play around with different ways of mark making for these tiny flowers. All right, the last thing we need to add are the smaller stars we drew on our sketch. Go back to the stars layer, change the color to frost, and drop the brush size back down to about 2%. While we have the sketch on, just go through and trace over those small crosses where the little stars are going to go. All right, I think I got them all. So now we can turn that sketch off just so that we have a clearer view, and then we can go in and complete those shapes. To make it look a little more magical, we can add some tiny dots to the remaining open spaces so it looks like the jar is filled with stars. You can vary the sizes. Remember to try to make your dots as random as possible so it doesn't look too much like a deliberate pattern. And you can add a few dots in front of the flowers as well. Don't forget to also add a few dots surrounding the stars on the outside of the jar as well. All right, for the final touch, let's add a little glow to some of the stars. So let's create a new layer and drag it right below the layer with the stars. Choose pure white. And we're going to drag the opacity slider, this slider at the bottom, down to about 50%. I'm going to increase the brush size to about 20%. And we're going to paint a little circle behind each of the large stars. And we can do the same around these stars on the outside as well. All right, so it should look a little like this. Now you're going to go to the Adjustments menu, tap Gaussian Blur, and then you're going to drag your pencil to the right until those circles start to blur. I think I'm going to leave it at around 8 or 9%. If you keep dragging your pencil too far to the right, they're just going to blur to the point where they disappear. So you don't want to go too far. You can just bring your pencil back to the left until you're around 8 or 9%. Then tap on the Adjustments menu again to exit that mode. And don't forget to turn the opacity slider back up on that brush. And that's it. We're all done. There's our jar of stars. I hope you had fun with this painting. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And I'd love to see your version, so please share your artwork in the community feed. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.